Gather round and welcome back to another edition of Todd Talks College Football, folks. And that's right, this is the Week 2 edition of 5 Thoughts on This Week in College Football. And a lot of people didn't think this week was going to be a great week and thought maybe there was just only one game, Michigan and Oklahoma, that was really going to set the weekend. And I'm here to tell you, folks, that's not what we saw at all. We saw what I like to call show me what you got Saturday. And we saw a lot of teams out here that I think probably failed the test of time here in the week 2 of the college football season. We had some upsets. We had some surprises. We had a few shocking turn of events here, and we'll talk about those as we go on with the show. But I did want to talk about one little program change that we are going to make here at Todd Talks College Football, and that is going to be our Baker's Dozen poll. Normally, I release this poll today in this show, but I've come to the conclusion that with this season going to be as crazy as it's going to be, I'm going to need a little bit more time to get down my top 13 teams as we roll week to week through this season. So I'm going to change this show up a little bit. I'm going to make a new show for the Baker's Dozen. It'll be a 10-15 minute show just on the top 13 teams for this week in college football. And I'm going to add a new little segment here in the 5 Thoughts on This Week in College Football, and it'll be called the Quick Hitter segment there. The quick hitter segment is what we'll call it. We just came up with that right now. So we're going to add that to the show today. We'll have a new show coming out, the Baker's Dozen. This show will be released either Monday evening or Tuesday morning once I can get it all figured out, recorded, edited, and out to you for your viewing pleasure. So buckle up, grab a soda, a pop, a beer, whatever. Quench your thirst because we got a lot to discuss in this week 2 college football season. Thought 1 on this week in college football. I mean, the question of the year is right now, is Billy Napier done at Florida? That's right, folks. We saw the USF Bulls roll into the swamp and beat the Florida Gators 18-16 on the home turf. And it is something else because the USF Bulls, don't forget, just a few days ago, a week ago, took down Boise State and demolished them in a pretty bad beatdown. I can't remember the score off the top of my head, but something like 34-7. So it was something else. So is Billy Napier finished at Florida? This team is definitely underachieving into week 2. They obviously blew out Long Island in the first week, but this was their first, I wouldn't even say big test considering what you're going to hear they got coming up on their schedule in the next 4 weeks. But this Florida team, look, I had these guys at like 8 or 9 in my poll. I've been high on Florida all year. I thought this was going to be a great season for Florida, 9-3 at worst, and maybe 10-2. But this is not starting out well for Billy Napier. This is terrible. And wait till you hear this. The next 2 games, just so you know, he's going to Baton Rouge next week to play the LSU Tigers. Then he turns around and goes to Miami to play the Hurricanes. Then he's got a bye week, and they got Texas coming into the swamp. And then the following week, they turn around, and they got to go to Texas A&M. And then just for fun and giggles, they get Mississippi State, who we'll talk about here in a few minutes, on their schedule. Then they got a game with Georgia on the neutral site. This could turn into a shit show in the swamp down there in Gatorville. But I'm telling you, Billy Napier, I think this might be the end of him if he can't pull out 3 of these next 4 games, which is going to be very challenging considering 3 of them are on the road, and one of them is against Texas, who we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But the bottom line here is Billy Napier is on the hot seat at Florida, in Gainesville, in the swamp, wherever you want to call it. This place is on fire because Billy Napier just lost to USF at home. And let's talk about USF. Again, they beat Boise State. Now they beat the Gators. Guess where they go next week? Oh, that's right. They go down to Miami, and they get to play the Hurricanes. Could USF knock off the Hurricanes and the Gators in back-to-back weeks? I don't know. We'll see. But if they can, this is a top 5 team in anybody's book. And when my Bakers doesn't come out, you'll be surprised to see that there's a very good chance USF is going to be in that poll with these 2 wins to start the season. Now, I also told you going into the season, the American Conference is the toughest conference in the Little Six. That's right, the Group of 5 plus the Pac-2, the Little Six. The American Conference is the bully dog of this smaller division of football here. In this group, think about this, folks. USF in the conference, they still got to go on the road at Memphis. They got to go on the road at Navy. This is not going to be an easy conference schedule for them. They got Texas State, or North Texas, excuse me. They got to go to there, and they're going to have a championship game. They don't play Tulane this year. But you think about this American Conference. You've got Memphis, you got Navy, you got USF, you got Tulane. We haven't even talked about Tulane. Tulane's a good football team. This is going to be this is the little SEC, I guess you could say, down there in the South. But this is a very good football team. USF to go into the swamp and win in the format and the way that they did, 18-16, quite the showing for them. The Bulls are back, baby. We'll see if they can beat Miami this week. It's going to be a fun challenge. So, Florida, you don't come through this thing at 3-1 in this next stretch of 4 games. I think it's going to be the end all. But they could lose all 4 of these games down there in Gainesville, and that is going to be very challenging considering I had extremely high hopes for them. So the Gators better pick it up if they want to go anywhere, and they better go beat LSU in Baton Rouge on Saturday night. And if they can't do that, it's going to be a tough road. Thought 2 on this week in college football. Let's move down to Norman, Oklahoma for this next stop on college football in week 2. And what we saw John Mateer take control of the Oklahoma offense against a really good Michigan defense. Don't forget, folks, as bad as that offense is up there in Ann Arbor, this defense is just as good. And that was a very challenging defense John Mateer went up against. Probably one of the toughest defenses he's going to play this year outside of I could say Alabama, but we maybe not. LSU, I think Michigan's defense is probably overall better than LSU, but this is a very good win for John Mateer. He was 21 of 34, 270 yards. He had an interception, but he did rush for 2 TDs and have a 1 passing TD. And he had 74 yards rushing, and a lot of those in really key critical situations. Now, let's move over to the Michigan Wolverines for a second here. Everyone thought Bryce Underwood was going to be the phenom. And I even told you last week that I thought he had a really good opening game at home in the tune-up game for this game. And, as a true freshman starting in his first game, I thought he had really, a good game. But I also said, I didn't think this was anything better than an 8-4 team this year because they did have to go on the road 6 times this year, and it's tough for a true freshman quarterback playing on the road, especially the defense as good as Brent Venables' defense is at Oklahoma. This was going to be a major test for him, and he failed. Bottom line is, you can listen to Dave Portney here. He even said it.
Expecting the moon, I didn't get the moon. I didn't get really anything. And I guess the theory is we're just going to protect this kid and maybe bring him around towards the end of the year, or like next year he'll be ready. But whatever the game plan was that they went into Norman with today, that was not a game plan to win a football game. That was a game plan to not get embarrassed.
So the bottom line here is Michigan's offense isn't very good with Bryce Underwood yesterday. Now, Can the kid improve? Yes, I think he's going to improve throughout the year. But is this a team that's in the top 13 of the country right now? No. I thought people had them overrated all year. I didn't have them in my Baker's Dozen poll. And quite frankly, they really weren't in the conversation for the three people that were out of the Baker's Dozen poll. That would be 14, 15, and 16. I didn't think this team, with the freshman quarterback and their schedule, which does include 6 road games this year, and they just lost the first one, is going to be a challenging year for them. And Bryce is going to get better. And can he get better by the end of the year and make an 8-4 season with the win over the Buckeyes versus 7-5 season with the loss to the Buckeyes? That's what I think they're playing for right now, is how are they going to beat the Buckeyes at the end of the year and salvage this and go into next year with a sophomore Bryce Underwood who's been through some struggles and challenges, and he'll be ready to go next year. All right, let's talk about their running game. Now, Michigan did have a decent running game. Justice Hayes did his stat line was pretty good. He had 125 yards rushing, but if you look at those rushing yards, he had 75 yards on the opening play coming out in the third quarter. And that was a touchdown, which brought him back into the game a little bit. But if you look at the rest of the 18 carries, he only averaged 2.77 yards a carry. And that's not going to work for the Michigan offense when they don't have a quarterback that can really throw, and they have to rely on a running game. And yes, the stat line looks decent at 125 yards. Chalk out the 75-yard touchdown out of there, and now all of a sudden you got a very, pedestrian storyline there, 18 carries for 50 yards. That is not going to get it done. And Justice Hayes is going to have to pick it up if they want to go anywhere. But the story of the day, folks, was John Mateer. Again, this was my favorite to go into win the Heisman. I thought, Oklahoma quarterbacks, they win the Heisman when they have great years. And I thought this was a great game for John Mateer, especially playing against the first real defense that he's seen in his career. And he's going to see a lot more of that in the SEC as they go on. Maybe not as good as Michigan's, but real damn close. Or, maybe some schemes up that they're going to do that they took from the Michigan game that they're going to be able to put in his face and see if they can confuse him. But I think John Mateer was the story of the night there in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma was off to a 2-0 record. And if you remember, I put them at 13 in my Baker's Dozen last week over teams like South Carolina because I felt Oklahoma has a bigger upside. Thought 3 on this week in college football. Well, let's talk about a few of those SEC teams I just mentioned in the prior clip. Let's talk about LSU, Georgia, and South Carolina a little bit here. So all 3 of these teams, quite frankly, yesterday were underwhelming by a mile. The LSU jumped all the way to number 2. From their big win last week at Clemson. Now, we also saw Clemson look terrible against Troy, so we really got to start questioning how good Clemson is, which we will. And was LSU's victory as big as it looks now that we saw Clemson for week 2? And this was not a very good football team, Louisiana Tech. I mean, they're a decent Group of 5 team, Little 6 team that can compete in there once in a while. But this is LSU we're talking about. They walked out of here with a 23-7 victory. And folks, it wasn't even really that. It was 10-0 late in the third quarter. Like 4 minutes to go before LSU could stretch the lead from 10-0 against Louisiana Tech. This just did not look like the team they looked like the week before. And then another team that didn't look the part was the Georgia Bulldogs. And look, I haven't been super high on the Georgia Bulldogs. I actually predicted them to have 9-4 record this year. I do have them ranked in my last week's Baker Dozen in the top 5, just, because nothing else was really there to put there. But I don't think this Georgia team is as good as people are giving them credit for yet. And the key word is yet. But this defense definitely needs some work. Gunnar Stockton is okay, but he's not a game maker, game changer, game breaker. This is a team that's going to need a lot of work, and they've got a pretty challenging schedule ahead of them. They got some tough teams. They got to play Texas. They got to play Florida. They got to play, and 2 teams I just mentioned, maybe they're sucked too. Who knows? But I don't think Georgia in a 28-6 win over Austin Peay. And yes, I know they had some weather delays and stuff like that. But bottom line here is this was an underwhelming Georgia performance, just much like LSU's was. And then you had South Carolina, 38-10 over South Carolina State. And yeah, it's a 28-point victory. But remember, 2 of those touchdowns came off punt returns for touchdowns. So you take the 2 punt returns out. This was a 24-10 game. Now, could they have scored on those drives that they had the punt returns on? Yes, they could have, but they could not have too. There's a very good chance they would have punted if you look at the box score in this game. So I'm not so sure that these 3 teams are as good as we thought they were last week. I'm not saying they're not good football teams. I'm just saying as good as we thought they were last week, they underperformed this week for sure. And I just don't know that, a Georgia team loses 2 fumbles in a game. And this is just unprecedented stuff for this team. So I'm not really 100% sold yet on Georgia, South Carolina. I'm more sold on LSU right at this moment. But LSU is going to need to play a whole hell of a lot better, even against a Florida team who just lost to USF, as we discussed. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think those 3 teams in the SEC are all fighting for that championship, and they need to have better production than they did yesterday in week 2. Thought 4 on this week in college football. Let's move out of the SEC for a minute. Let's talk about the Illinois Fighting Illini, folks. Yes, this football team is a pretty damn good football team. And I've had this team in my baker's dozen since the beginning of the season. And yesterday they went down to Duke. And granted, I told you in the weekly predictor show that I thought Illinois' run game was going to just be too much for Duke to handle. And in the first half, that was by far not the case. I think Illinois ended the first half with negative rushing yards in the game. But they did end up pulling out a 45-19 victory over Duke, and they really put the hammer down in the fourth quarter on this Duke Blue Devil team. Surprisingly enough, Duke outgained Illinois in this game, like 438 to 419 yards, but they just kept making critical mistakes. A fumble on the punt, another fumble. They just couldn't get anything going. Illinois did only rush for 123 yards in this football game, but like I told you, in the first half, they had negative rushing yards. So in the second half, they had at least 127 yards rushing. So they did really put the hammer down, and you saw the score just skyrocket from there. This was a really tight game in the third quarter, like 20-13, and then next thing you know, it's like 49 or 45-19. So Illinois really turned it on. Luke Altmaier, pretty good game, 22 of 31, 296 yards, 3 touchdowns. So old Luke had some really nice throws down the field. So this Illinois football team is looking pretty good after week 2. It'll be interesting to see what happens here over the next few weeks. They got some challenging games coming forward. They do got to play Indiana, I think, in 2 weeks. So we're going to see exactly where this team goes, but I like this victory for them. I think this was a tough game to play. Manny Diaz at Duke is a tough defensive coordinator, and he clearly had some answers for him in the first half, but they went in, they made the adjustments, and they came out, and especially in the fourth quarter, they just put their foot on their throat, and they just crushed them out. And I think they had something like a 18 or 17 point third or fourth quarter to really spread this game apart at 45-19. So good job fighting Illini. Thought 5 on this week in college football. That's right, folks. That sound means we are going to head down to Starksville, Mississippi, and the cowbells were going crazy last night in Starksville. We saw Mississippi State beat the Arizona State Sun Devils in a 24-20 game that was just it was almost an instant classic. Honestly, a 24-20 game is hard to say it's an instant classic, but this was a heck of a good football game. And, Mississippi State came out with the victory, which at the beginning of the season, I wasn't super high on Mississippi State. I don't know that anybody was super high on Mississippi State, except for maybe the people in Starksville because they knew what was going on down there. But this is a team that is now they've tied their wins from last year with 2 wins to start the season, and they just beat Arizona State. They're going to have to make some noise. There's a lot of teams that thought Mississippi State was going to be a W on their schedule, but this all of a sudden is a team that looks like they can compete, and they got the speedster. What was his name? Thompson, Speedster Thompson. Holy crap, this guy is something else. So we had Mississippi State go up 17-0. Arizona State kicks a field goal to make it 17-3 at halftime. Then Arizona State roars back in the second half, takes the lead. Then all of a sudden, you thought Arizona State, okay, they escaped out of Starksville and the cowbells and all. And the next thing you know is that you see Blake Shapen throw a what'd he throw? What was that throw he had? It was like a 58-yard TD throw to win the game with 30 seconds left. It was just absolute bonkers and chaos. And Thompson had a big receiving catch, like 47 yards earlier in the game. And then he had this 58-yarder. And Mississippi State pulls off an incredible upset, which some people, I'll give credit to Kirk Herbstreit. He had this as a super dog of the week, and he actually said they'd win straight out, and they did. That was a hell of a pick there. This really was a tale of two halves. Mississippi State controlled the first half, was up 17-0, ended up 17-3. Arizona State comes out at halftime, decides they're just going to power their rushing game. Between Brown and Ua, both of them rushed for 100-plus yards. Sam Levitt had some big rushes in that game to get critical first downs. This was a team on a destiny with the rushing game in the second half, and you thought their rushing game would be less effective because they lost Scattaboo, but honestly, it was more effective. But at the end of the day, Mississippi State got the win 24-20, held Sam Levitt to really not a great day throwing the ball, 10-22, 82 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. But Blake Shapen was what a game. 19-33, 279, 3 TDs. And this, I'm telling you, this Mississippi State team, a lot of teams in the SEC chalked this up as a win. And not so fast, my friends, as Lee Corso would tell you. This is a decent football team. They got an edge rusher. That's a difference maker. This team could, they're going to definitely improve off their 2 wins from last year because they were already there at 2 wins. But I'm telling you, this could be a sleeper team to make some upsets, make some noise, and maybe control who plays in the SEC championship. Again, great job to the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Extra. Let's spend 1 minute here talking about the Texas Longhorns. They did get a victory over San Jose State yesterday, 38-7. But I will tell you this, Arch Manning started out this game pretty damn slow. Same things we saw in the first game against Ohio State in the first series and partway through the second series. He got on a little bit of a track. But really, it wasn't Arch Manning in this game that was concerning to me. It was the fact that San Jose State had 4 turnovers in the first half. 4. And this game going into halftime was still 28-7. Now, if you turn the ball over 4 times in the first half, I would think Texas this game should have been 49-7, something like that in the first half. But this game was 28-7. It ended up being 38-7, unexpiring game for Texas for me. I had high hopes for this team, but man, they're going to have to play a hell of a lot better if they're going to win these games that they've got coming up. And it's going to be a real tough road when you got to go to the Swamp, even though we saw what Florida was yesterday, or to Georgia in the Athens. We saw what Georgia looked like yesterday, but these teams are going to change week by week. But this Texas team still was less than impressive yesterday, even in a 38-7 victory over San Jose State. Extra. Well, we had a barn burner at Williams Stadium in Wilmington, Ohio, between the Wilmington Fighting Quakers and the Worcester Fighting Scots. And that's right, folks, this game ended up Wilmington 59, Worcester 35, and it was quite the barn burner game. We had 2 quarterbacks that were having quite the game. Isaac Ross was 13-23, 267 yards passing, 3 TDs and an interception. We had Michael Boyce there at Wooster, he was 22 of 35, 362 yards, and 4 touchdowns. This was quite the battle. Kai Smith was probably the player of the game for Wilmington College. This running back, number 11, speedster, 166 yards rushing yesterday. They got an additional 45 yards out of Bryce Stout. And I'm telling you, folks, this team was dancing the night away. Jack, my son, he finished the game with 2 tackles, had a ceiling block on a kick return for a touchdown, made the final block, popped the runner open, and he took it to the house for a touchdown. That was a 77-yard return on that one. They also had a 60-yard kick return, so special teams was really dynamite for the Wilmington Quakers last night. So a great start for Wilmington, 1-0, heading to Baldwin Wallace next week. We'll see if they can keep this winning streak alive and go to 2-0. Quick hitters. All right, let's get into some of these quick hitters here. Now, I told you in the Week 0, 5 Thoughts on Week 0 show, I told you that Ireland game, Iowa State and Kansas State came out of that game. I told you that Kansas State looked like a team that was going to spiral down like what we saw Florida State did last year after that game, losing to Georgia Tech. And here we are, 2 weeks later, and we see the death spiral begin there in Manhattan, Kansas. What did we see last week? We saw Kansas State needing 30 seconds in the end of the game to score a touchdown to beat North Dakota. And this week, they got Army coming in, who lost to Tarleton State last week. That's right, the most Googled team in America last week. Tarleton State beat Army, and Army rolls into Manhattan, Kansas, and they beat the Wildcats. The Wildcats are now 1-2 with the last-second victory over North Dakota, an FCS school. This Kansas State Wildcat team is on a death spiral from hell, and it all boils down to leaving that Ireland game. And maybe the bottom line here is we're going to start to see a trend. The loser of that Ireland kickoff game is due for a death spiral. The next thing on my quick hitters is Julian Sayin. That's right, the Buckeye quarterback in his second start. He's already broken the consecutive completion passing record to start the game. Will Howard had this record. He broke it last year at 14, and it didn't take long for Julian Sayin to come in and make 15 straight completions to start the game. He's now the record holder in only his second game. This kid can sling the ball. They did find one thing, I think. They found an explosive back in Bo Jackson, the freshman, and I think this kid is going to get more carries as the season goes on, and we're going to see more explosiveness out of that running game, because Bo knows. And when your name's Bo Jackson, how do you not run like a beast? Let's move down to Athens. Not Athens, Georgia, over to Athens, Ohio. And that's right, folks. We saw the Ohio Bobcats beat the West Virginia Mountaineers at home in 17-10. Now, I told you in my weekly predictor show, I thought this game would go over the 60 point that it was set at on the over-under. And man, was I wrong. It was a 27 total point game, but this was a big win for the Ohio Bobcats. They played Rutgers tough the first week and came up a little short. They beat West Virginia. Next week, they come to the Shoe. Can the Bobcats play well against Ohio State? We're going to find out, but what a big win for them down there in Athens in the victory over West Virginia. In the Cyhawk Bowl, we saw Iowa State outlast Iowa 16-13. And if you remember from my predictor show, why I tell you, I told you to take Iowa into 3.5. You would have been a winner. I did think this game would go over the over at 41.5, but it did not. It was a low-scoring affair like they all were. I told you all these games go under the under. I thought this year would be a difference maker. It wasn't. Pretty lackluster game considering it was on up against the Baylor SMU game, which ended up 48-45. In 2 overtimes, and my man, the Sawyer Robinson Band, he was 34 of 50 for 440 yards and 4 TDs, brought his team back and beat the Kevin Jennings-led SMU Mustangs to take that big victory for Baylor. So those were some big getter game. I had them both on, so I saw them both. Another thing we saw yesterday was Oregon. They just dominated Oklahoma State yesterday. Not that Oklahoma State's a good football team, but this team is looking more and more and more like a real playoff contender there for the Ducks. I didn't think that they would be that dominant in that game. I was scared to give the 28.5 points because I thought Oklahoma State might, maybe make a game of it late, but there was no making a game of this. It was an absolute beatdown. Another beatdown that occurred in the first half yesterday was Troy over Clemson. Holy smokes, folks. Did you see this? 16-0 at one point in this game. Troy was beating Clemson. Clemson comes back to win this game. They were in a slump after LSU, which is surprising. I would have thought they would have been ready to go out and dominate this game. Now, they did have some weather delays and stuff. Other games in the South had the same thing. South Carolina, Georgia, Navy even had a delay. But this was a less than impressive victory for Clemson. I'm really concerned. I had Clemson number 1 coming into the season, and they have totally disappointed me on that thought. So we'll see where Clemson is. And then let's talk about Penn State for a second. I mean, what were they doing yesterday? They were just kind of bumbling around trying to beat FIU. They ended up doing 34-0. What I thought was interesting in this Penn State game was the way that ESPN handled this game afterwards. I heard one of the commentators say, well, Penn State struggled through this game with Florida International, but LSU breezed by Louisiana Tech. I don't know about you, but a 34-0 game versus a 23-7 game that was 10-0 late in the third quarter for LSU, I don't know if breezing by would be the word. There's a little bit more SEC bias for you there. Well, overall, I thought this was a very entertaining week 2. Show me what you got Saturday. We saw some teams. Show me what you got, USF and some others. Mississippi State, to name a few. We saw some teams that, tried to make historic comebacks in ASU. But really at the bottom line is we saw a lot of question marks on some teams in the top 10 that we need to get answered over the next few weeks. And guess what? We're going to get them answered because we got some really interesting games coming up this weekend. And Clemson better get on the road because they're going on the road to Georgia Tech next weekend, which is going to be quite the interesting game. We got Georgia traveling to Tennessee. Tennessee looks pretty good, 72 points, most in school history since the poll era, 1936. We got USF traveling to Miami. Could USF if they get wins over Boise State, Florida, and Miami, I can promise you folks to next week, they're going to be number 1 in the country in my poll. So we'll see if they can do that. We got the Gators off that tough loss to USF traveling to LSU on that uninspiring win against Louisiana Tech. We got Texas A&M traveling into Notre Dame. Notre Dame was on a weird second week bye week this week, so they had some time to rest up over that beatdown they took. Well, not beatdown. It was a real close game. I thought Notre Dame should have won that game against Miami, but the beating that their bodies took, they got to rest because they're going to play a Texas A&M team that, quite frankly, looked okay yesterday, but not great against, I think it was Utah State. We got an interesting game in Arkansas traveling to Ole Miss. Wilmington College traveling to Trestle Stadium there up in Baldwin Wallace. We'll see if they can get another victory. So it should be a great week 3 coming up. So, well, I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe button, leave a comment, tell me where I'm wrong. I know a lot of you think I'm wrong. I've been wrong already a lot, but here we are. We're going to be wrong again, and we're going to be right. I've been totally right on Kansas State. I've been totally right on the American Conference, and I've been totally right on John Mateer, the leading Heisman candidate, through 2 weeks. And so again, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Be ready for the Baker's Dozen show. It'll be out just in a few days, maybe even a few hours. We'll see how quick I can get it out. And I will have my weekly predictor show released on Thursday. So don't forget, gather round in ALTT. We'll see you soon.